Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the Sleepy Professor channel. I'm glad to see you again. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through the ancient world of dinosaurs. There's something deeply calming about these magnificent creatures, isn't there? The way they moved through prehistoric forests, slow and deliberate. The way they existed for so many millions of years, patient and powerful, in a world so different from our own. For the next little while, just relax, settle into your pillows, let your breathing slow, and let me tell you some wonderful things about these remarkable animals that once walked the very ground beneath us so long ago that it almost feels like a dream. Close your eyes if you'd like. Get comfortable. There's nowhere you need to be. Nothing you need to do. Just listen, and let these ancient stories carry you gently towards sleep. Let's start with something that sounds almost magical, something that seems impossible. Did you know that dinosaurs ruled the Earth for approximately 165 million years? Just think about that for a moment. 165 million years. It's a span of time so vast that our human minds can barely comprehend it. We humans, in our current form, have only been around for about 300,000 years. The entire history of human civilization, from the first cities to the present day, spans only about 10,000 years. And yet dinosaurs, in all their magnificent diversity, thrived and evolved and adapted for 165 million years. They saw the world change in ways we can only imagine. Continents drifting, climates shifting, forests rising and falling like slow green waves across the landscape of deep time. And here's something even more soothing to think about as you settle deeper into your bed. The age of dinosaurs, that immense stretch of time we call the Mesozoic era, is divided into 3 periods, each with its own character, its own rhythm. First came the Triassic period, beginning about 252 million years ago, when dinosaurs first appeared, small and tentative, in a world still recovering from the greatest mass extinction the planet had ever seen. Then came the Jurassic period, beginning about 201 million years ago, when dinosaurs truly came into their own, growing larger, more diverse, filling every ecological niche from the driest deserts to the luscious swamps. And finally the Cretaceous period, beginning about 145 million years ago. The golden age of dinosaurs, when they reached their peak of diversity and spread to every continent on Earth. Just breathe gently as you think about these vast stretches of time, like slow waves lapping at a shore, each period flowing into the next with the patience of stone becoming sand. Now, let me tell you something that might surprise you. Something gentle and reassuring. Not all dinosaurs were enormous. When we think of dinosaurs, we often picture massive creatures like Brachiosaurus or Tyrannosaurus rex towering over the landscape, but the truth is, far more varied and, in many ways, more intimate than that. Some dinosaurs were quite small, no bigger than a chicken. There was a little dinosaur called Microraptor, for instance, that lived during the early Cretaceous period in what is now China. Microraptor was only about 2 to 3 feet long, including its tail, and it probably weighed less than 2 pounds. Imagine that, a dinosaur you could hold in your arms, with 4 wings covered in iridescent feathers that might have shimmered with colours of blue and black, like a raven catching the light. And speaking of small dinosaurs, let's talk about Compsognathus for a moment. This delicate little creature lived during the late Jurassic period, about 150 million years ago, in what is now Germany and France. Compsognathus was about the size of a turkey, weighing perhaps 6 or 7 pounds at most. It had a long, slender tail that it used for balance as it ran on its hind legs, chasing after insects and small lizards through the underbrush. Fossil evidence suggests it was quite fast, this little dinosaur, darting through the ferns and cycads of its ancient world with quick, precise movements. Just picture it there, in the dappled sunlight of a Jurassic forest, the air warm and humid, insects buzzing lazily in the afternoon heat. Let your breath slow down now, matching the gentle pace of these ancient scenes unfolding in your mind. Here's another peaceful thought to carry you deeper into rest. The very first dinosaur ever scientifically described was Megalosaurus, way back in 1824. A British geologist named William Buckland examined some fossils that had been found in a quarry in Oxfordshire, England. These were massive bones, clearly from some large creature, but nothing like any animal known to be living at that time. Buckland studied these bones carefully, these ancient remnants of a creature that had died more than 160 million years earlier, and he recognized them as belonging to a giant extinct reptile. He named it Megalosaurus, which means great lizard, though he had no idea at the time just how different this creature was from modern lizards. He couldn't have known that he was opening a door to an entirely lost world, a world that had existed for so much longer than anything he could have imagined. And you know what's beautiful about that moment? For millions of years, these bones had been lying in the rock, patient and still, waiting, just waiting. There's something so calming about that thought, isn't there? The stone holding its secrets, the fossils resting in darkness in no hurry at all, until finally, after all that time, someone noticed them, picked them up and began to wonder. Let me tell you about another early discovery, another gentle step in humanity's awakening to the reality of these ancient creatures. In 1858, the first nearly complete dinosaur skeleton was discovered in New Jersey. It was a hadrosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur, and it was named Hadrosaurus fulci after the man who discovered it, William Parker Fulk. What's remarkable about this discovery is that it was the first time scientists could see that dinosaurs stood upright on their legs, like birds or mammals, rather than sprawling with their legs out to the sides like crocodiles. This might seem like a small detail, but it changed everything. Suddenly, dinosaurs weren't just giant lizards lying sluggishly in swamps. They were active, dynamic creatures that walked and ran across the landscape. Close your eyes and picture that moment of realization. The scientists standing around this ancient skeleton, understanding for the first time how these creatures really moved through their world. Now, let's drift over to something that connects these ancient creatures to the present day in the most unexpected way. You see, birds are dinosaurs. Not descended from dinosaurs, not related to dinosaurs, but actual living dinosaurs. When we watch a robin hopping across the lawn or a sparrow taking a dust bath, we're watching a dinosaur going about its day. Birds belong to a group called theropods, the same group that includes Tyrannosaurus rex and Velociraptor. Over many millions of years, some theropods evolved lighter bones, more complex feathers, and the ability to fly. But they never stopped being dinosaurs, so when people say that dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, that's not quite accurate. The non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, yes, the ones that couldn't fly, but one lineage survived and flourished and is still with us today, singing outside our windows at dawn. Isn't there something deeply comforting about that? The ancient world isn't as lost as we thought. It's still here, in a way, singing to us. Let's talk about feathers for a moment, because this is one of the most beautiful revelations of modern paleontology. For most of human history, we imagine dinosaurs as scaly, reptilian creatures, their skin rough and dry like a lizard's or an alligator's. But discoveries over the past few decades, particularly in China, have revealed that many dinosaurs were actually covered in feathers. Not just the small ones that would eventually evolve into birds, but even some fairly large dinosaurs bore plumage of various sorts. These weren't always the complex, flight-worthy feathers of modern birds, mind you. Many were simpler structures, more like fuzzy down or hair-like filaments. But imagine a dinosaur covered in soft, fluffy feathers, perhaps to keep warm during cool nights, or to display vibrant colours during mating season. Breathe slowly and picture one of these feathered dinosaurs, maybe a Yutyrannus, a relative of T-Rex that lived in what is now China about 125 million years ago. Yutyrannus was about 30 feet long and covered in a coat of long, shaggy feathers. Imagine it moving through a forest in the early morning, mist rising from the ground, its feathers damp with dew, catching the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. Here's something else that's wonderfully peaceful to contemplate. Plant-eating dinosaurs, the herbivores, often lived in herds, just like many modern animals do. We know this from fossil trackways, from bone beds, where many individuals of the same species are found together, and from nesting sites, where dozens or even hundreds of dinosaurs gathered to lay their eggs. Imagine a herd of Maiasaura, the good mother lizard, moving slowly across an ancient floodplain in what is now Montana, about 75 million years ago. These were gentle creatures, about 30 feet long, walking mostly on all fours, occasionally rising up on their hind legs to reach higher vegetation. They traveled together, the young ones protected in the center of the herd, the adults keeping watch for predators. At night, they would settle down together, the warmth of many bodies close, the sound of their breathing like a slow tide, rising and falling in the darkness. Let yourself sink deeper into your pillows now, feeling safe and warm, like one of those young Maiasaura in the center of the herd. Now let me tell you about the largest dinosaur eggs ever discovered. They belong to a group of dinosaurs called Oviraptorosaurs, and some of these eggs were absolutely enormous, about 18 inches long. That's bigger than an ostrich egg, bigger than any bird egg you've ever seen. But here's what's particularly touching about these eggs. We've found fossils of adult Oviraptorosaurs sitting on their nests, their arms spread wide to cover their eggs, exactly like a bird brooding today. These fossils were formed when these devoted parents were buried suddenly, probably by sandstorms or mudslides, and they died there on their nests, protecting their unborn young. It's both sad and beautiful, this ancient gesture of parental care, preserved for millions of years, showing us that even creatures that lived so long ago in such a different world felt the same drive to protect their offspring that we feel today. Just breathe gently with that thought, the continuity of care across the vast distances of time. Let's drift now to the subject of dinosaur sounds, which is something we can only guess at, but the guesses themselves are rather soothing to consider. Some dinosaurs, particularly the hadrosaurs with their elaborate crests, probably made low, resonant calls. These crests were hollow, filled with complex nasal passages that could have acted like natural musical instruments. A dinosaur like Parasaurolophus, with its long curved crest extending back from its skull, might have produced deep, haunting notes, like the sound of a distant foghorn or an enormous wooden flute. Imagine a herd of these creatures calling to each other at dusk, their voices carrying across wide valleys, echoing off distant cliffs, a prehistoric symphony played to an empty sky. Other dinosaurs might have hissed like crocodiles, or made croaking sounds deep in their throats. Some might have been almost silent, communicating through body language, the angle of a head, the position of a tail, the slow blink of an eye. Here's a gentle fact about one of the most famous dinosaurs of all. Stegosaurus, that wonderful creature with the plates along its back and the spikes on its tail, had a brain about the size of a walnut, weighing only about 2.8 ounces. Its body, by contrast, could weigh as much as 5 tons. Now, for a long time, people made jokes about this, suggesting that Stegosaurus was stupid. But that's not really fair. Stegosaurus didn't need to be intelligent in the way we think of intelligence. It needed to be good at being a Stegosaurus, at finding the right plants to eat, at recognizing members of its own species, at defending itself from predators. And it did all of that successfully for millions of years, which is really all any species can ask for. Sometimes, being perfectly adapted to your environment is more important than being clever. Let that thought relax you, the idea that you don't always need to be doing more, thinking more, being more. Sometimes being exactly what you are is enough. Now, those plates on Stegosaurus's back, those distinctive diamond-shaped plates that make it so recognizable, weren't attached directly to its skeleton. They were embedded in its skin, held in place by connective tissue. Scientists have debated for years what purpose these plates served. Some thought they were armor, protection against predators, but they weren't really positioned right for that, and they weren't thick enough to provide much defense. More likely, they served a role in temperature regulation. The plates were full of blood vessels, and Stegosaurus could have controlled blood flow to them, standing with them facing the sun to warm up on cool mornings, or angling them to catch a breeze to cool down on hot afternoons. Some scientists also think the plates might have flushed with colour, turning red or pink when engorged with blood, perhaps as a display to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Picture a Stegosaurus in the late afternoon sun, its plates catching the golden light, warm and peaceful in a clearing somewhere in late Jurassic North America. Let me tell you about Diplodocus now. Another of those giant long-necked dinosaurs, but one with its own special character. Diplodocus could grow to about 90 feet long, but much of that length was neck and tail. Its actual body was relatively modest in size, almost delicate compared to its overall length. That enormous tail, which could be 40 feet long or more, was like a whip. Some scientists believe Diplodocus could crack its tail like a whip, creating a sound louder than a gunshot to scare away predators or communicate with others of its kind. Can you imagine that sound echoing across a Jurassic floodplain? A sound like thunder, sharp and sudden, then fading into silence. But most of the time, Diplodocus probably moved very slowly and quietly, its long neck sweeping back and forth as it browsed on low-growing vegetation, taking small bites from ferns and cycads, its tail dragging behind it, leaving a long, smooth trail in the soft earth. Here's something that might help you drift off. Sauropods, those giant long-necked dinosaurs like Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus and Apatosaurus probably spent most of their time eating. They had to, really, to fuel those enormous bodies. But they didn't chew their food. They didn't have the right kind of teeth for chewing. Instead, they had simple, peg-like teeth that they used to rake leaves and needles off branches, and they swallowed these plant materials whole, often swallowing stones as well, which would sit in their stomachs and help grind up the vegetation. These stones, called gastroliths, would tumble around in the dinosaur's gizzard, mashing the plant fibers into a digestible pulp, doing the work that teeth usually do. Imagine the slow, patient work of digestion happening inside these gentle giants, the steady, rhythmic grinding hour after hour as they stood peacefully in some ancient grove. Let's talk about Ankylosaurus for a moment, because there's something inherently calming about this heavily armoured dinosaur. Ankylosaurus lived during the very end of the Cretaceous period, right before the extinction event that would end the age of dinosaurs. It was about 20 to 25 feet long, low to the ground, built like a living tank. Its back and sides were covered with thick, bony plates called osteoderms, some of them bearing sharp spikes. Its head was heavily armoured, with thick plates fused to its skull, and its tail, its magnificent tail, ended in a massive club made of fused vertebrae and osteoderms, weighing perhaps 60 pounds. Ankylosaurus could swing this club with devastating force, easily capable of breaking the bones of any predator foolish enough to attack it. But here's the beautiful thing. For all its armour, for all its weaponry, Ankylosaurus was a plant eater, a peaceful herbivore that spent its days slowly, moving through forests, cropping low-growing plants with its beak-like mouth. It didn't go looking for fights. It just wanted to be left alone to eat and rest and enjoy the warm Cretaceous sun. All that armour, all that defensive capability was just in case. Just for protection. Ankylosaurus was ready for trouble, but it didn't seek it out. There's wisdom in that, isn't there? Being strong enough to defend yourself, but gentle enough to prefer peace. Now let me tell you something about the ocean during the age of dinosaurs, because while dinosaurs ruled the land and pterosaurs ruled the sky, the oceans were filled with incredible reptiles that weren't dinosaurs at all, but were just as magnificent. There were ichthyosaurs, which looked remarkably like dolphins, with streamlined bodies and long snouts full of teeth. There were plesiosaurs, with their paddle-like flippers, and in some cases, absurdly long necks that snaked through the water like living periscopes, and there were mosasaurs, enormous marine lizards that grew to lengths of 40 or 50 feet, apex predators that ruled the shallow seas of the late Cretaceous period. Imagine floating gently in warm, shallow water, sunlight filtering down through clear depths, and below you, far below, the shadow of a mosasaur gliding past, powerful and graceful, on its way to somewhere you'll never know. Here's a peaceful thought. Many dinosaurs, especially the herbivores, had very long intestines to help them digest tough plant material. The process of digestion was slow, taking hours or even days for food to pass completely through their systems. This meant that much of the time a dinosaur was simply existing, resting while its body did the slow work of extracting nutrition from its food. They would stand in one place for long periods, perhaps in the shade of a tall tree, or up to their bellies in a cool river, just waiting, just being, while inside them the patient chemistry of life continued its ancient work. Let yourself be like that now, just resting, just being. while your body does its own slow, patient work of preparing for sleep. Let me tell you about Triceratops, that iconic dinosaur with 3 horns and a massive bony frill. Triceratops lived at the very end of the Cretaceous period, in the same time and place as Tyrannosaurus rex, and the two were probably frequent adversaries, though Triceratops was more than capable of defending itself. Those horns, the 2 long ones above its eyes and the shorter one on its nose, could grow to 3 feet long or more, and they were probably covered in keratin, the same material as our fingernails, making them even longer and sharper. That bony frill wasn't solid though. It had large openings in it covered with skin which reduced its weight. The frill probably served multiple purposes, protecting the neck, supporting powerful jaw muscles, and serving as a display structure, perhaps flushing with blood and colour during mating season or territorial disputes. Imagine 2 male Triceratops, their frills bright with colour, facing each other in a clearing, making low rumbling sounds, deciding whether to fight or back down, the air thick with tension and the sweet smell of flowering plants. But most of the time, Triceratops was probably quite peaceful, using its parrot-like beak to clip through tough vegetation, feeding in small herds, moving slowly through forests and across open plains, their footsteps steady and sure. Here's something that demonstrates the incredible diversity of dinosaurs. There was a dinosaur called Therizinosaurus that had claws on its hands that were over 3 feet long, the longest claws of any animal we know of. These claws were thin and curved like enormous scythes. For years, scientists were puzzled by these claws. They seemed like weapons, but Therizinosaurus was actually a herbivore. Its teeth were small and leaf-shaped, perfect for processing plant material, not at all suited for eating meat. So what were those enormous claws for? Most likely they were used to pull down high branches, bringing fresh leaves and shoots within reach of its mouth. They might also have been used for defense, or for digging up roots and tubers. Imagine Therizinosaurus, this strange pot-bellied dinosaur with its long neck and its absurdly long claws, reaching up into the canopy of a tree, gently pulling down a branch heavy with leaves, then contentedly stripping those leaves off and eating them, while birds chatter in the branches above. Let's drift over to the subject of dinosaur nests now, because there's something especially tender about this topic. We've found many fossilized dinosaur nests over the years, and they tell us a lot about how these creatures cared for their young. Some dinosaurs, like the hadrosaurs, built large, bowl-shaped nests out of vegetation, like enormous bird nests. They would lay their eggs in circular patterns, sometimes a dozen or more eggs arranged carefully in the nest. After the eggs hatched, many dinosaur parents continued to care for their young, bringing them food, protecting them from predators, teaching them, in whatever way dinosaurs taught, how to be dinosaurs. We've found evidence that some dinosaurs returned to the same nesting grounds year after year, generation after generation, creating enormous colonies where hundreds or thousands of dinosaurs would gather to breed. Can you imagine the sound of such a place? The calls of adults, the peeping of hatchlings, the rustle of movement through underbrush, all of it happening under a warm Cretaceous sun, life continuing its patient cycle of birth and growth and death and birth again. Breathe slowly and let yourself feel connected to that ancient cycle, that patient turning of seasons and years. Here's something almost unbelievable about sauropods, those giant long-necked dinosaurs. Some of them grew to truly astounding sizes. Argentinosaurus, which lived about 95 million years ago in what is now Argentina, may have been the largest land animal ever to exist. Estimates vary because we don't have a complete skeleton, but Argentinosaurus probably weighed somewhere between 70 and 100 tons, maybe even more. That's as much as 15 or 20 elephants. It was perhaps 100 feet long or more. Just one of its vertebrae, one single bone from its spine, was taller than a person. Think about what it must have been like to be that large. Every movement slow and deliberate, each step like a small earthquake. The world around you necessarily small by comparison. Trees that seemed tall to other creatures barely reaching your shoulder. You could look down at almost everything, living in a permanent state of height and distance, the ground far below, the sky close above. And yet, despite their size, these animals started life as babies small enough to fit in your lap. They hatched from eggs not much larger than a football, and then they grew, slowly but steadily for decades, perhaps for more than a century, getting larger and larger, until they reached these almost impossible sizes. There's something patient and reassuring about that kind of growth, isn't there? Slow, but sure, one day at a time, never rushing, just continuing. Let me tell you about Pachycephalosaurus, a dinosaur with one of the most distinctive features in all of paleontology. Pachycephalosaurus had a dome of solid bone on the top of its head, up to 10 inches thick. For years, scientists thought these dinosaurs used their thick skulls to headbutt each other, like bighorn sheep, crashing their heads together in contests of strength. More recently, though, some scientists have suggested that this wouldn't have worked very well. The dome wasn't in quite the right position for effective head-to-head collision, and the impact might have caused serious neck injuries. Instead, perhaps these dinosaurs butted each other on the flanks, or perhaps the domes were primarily for display, visual signals of health and maturity. The bigger and more prominent the dome, the more impressive the individual. Picture Pachycephalosaurus, with its thick skull and its relatively small body, moving through late Cretaceous forests, occasionally pausing to display to a rival or a potential mate, lowering its head to show off that impressive dome, catching the dappled sunlight. Here's a fact that connects the deep past to the present in an unexpected way. The fossils we find, all those bones and tracks and impressions in stone, represent only a tiny, tiny fraction of all the dinosaurs that ever lived. Think about it. For a creature to become a fossil, it has to die in just the right place, usually somewhere that it can be quickly buried by sediment, protected from scavengers and decay. Then that sediment has to turn to stone over millions of years. Then that stone has to survive all the geological violence of mountain building and erosion and continental drift. Then, finally, it has to be exposed at just the right time for a human to find it. The odds of any individual dinosaur becoming a fossil that we discover are astronomically small. So every fossil we find, every single one, is a small miracle. It represents not just the dinosaur itself, but an incredible chain of coincidences and circumstances that preserved it for us to find. When you see a dinosaur skeleton in a museum, you're not just looking at bones. You're looking at the result of millions of years of perfect accidents, a message from deep time that somehow, against all odds, made it through to reach us. Isn't there something almost spiritual about that? The patience of stone, the persistence of memory, the fact that nothing is ever truly lost. Let's talk about Spinosaurus for a while, because this is one of the strangest and most recently updated dinosaurs in our understanding. For a long time, we thought Spinosaurus was basically a large theropod that lived near water and ate fish. It had a long, narrow snout full of conical teeth, perfect for catching slippery prey, and elongated spines on its back that formed a sail or possibly a hump. But discoveries in recent years have revealed that Spinosaurus was even more specialized for aquatic life than we thought. Its bones were dense and heavy, like those of penguins or hippos, which would have helped it stay submerged in water. Its feet were paddle-shaped, probably webbed, excellent for swimming, and that tail, that long muscular tail, was tall and flat, perfect for propelling the dinosaur through water with side-to-side strokes. Spinosaurus, it turns out, probably spent much of its time actually in the water, perhaps more than any other dinosaur we know of. Imagine it in some ancient North African river, about 95 million years ago, gliding through murky water, its sail breaking the surface, its eyes just above the waterline, watching for fish. When it spots one, it dips its head below the surface, those narrow jaws snapping shut with precise speed, emerging with its prize, water streaming from its snout as it swallows. Breathe slowly and imagine the coolness of that ancient water, the quiet moment before the strike, the patience of a predator waiting for exactly the right moment. Here's something that might surprise you about T-Rex, that most famous of all dinosaurs. Tyrannosaurus rex probably couldn't run very fast, at least not as fast as we often see in movies. Its legs were powerful, yes, but they were also short relative to its body, and it was very heavy, probably 6 to 9 tons. Recent studies suggest T-Rex's top speed was probably around 12 to 15 miles per hour, maybe 20 at the absolute most for short bursts. That's about the speed of a human jogger, not exactly lightning fast. But here's the thing, T-Rex didn't need to be faster than other predators. It needed to be fast enough to catch its prey, and its prey, animals like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus, were even slower and heavier than it was. And T-Rex had other advantages. It had an incredible sense of smell, probably better than almost any other land animal. It had excellent vision, with forward-facing eyes that gave it good depth perception. And it had, without exaggeration, the most powerful bite of any land animal ever. Its bite force has been estimated at 12,000 to 13,000 pounds, enough to bite through bone as if it were crushing a soda can. So T-Rex didn't chase its prey in long-running pursuits. It probably hunted more patiently than that, stalking carefully, watching, waiting for the right moment, then attacking with devastating power when its prey was vulnerable. Let yourself relax into that slower pace, that patient approach. Not everything needs to be rushed. Sometimes, waiting for the right moment is the most powerful choice. Now here's a gentle fact about dinosaur eggs. Different species lay different-sized eggs, of course, but even the largest dinosaurs didn't lay eggs bigger than a basketball. This is because of the physics of eggshells. If an egg gets too large, the shell either has to be so thick that a baby couldn't break out, or so thin that it would break under its own weight. So even massive sauropods that weighed dozens of tons as adults started life as hatchlings that could fit in your hand. This means baby dinosaurs had an enormous amount of growing to do. They had to increase their body mass by factors of thousands or even tens of thousands. They spent years, decades, just eating and growing in that patient way of long-lived creatures. There's something deeply peaceful about imagining a baby sauropod, maybe just a few weeks old, wandering among the legs of adults like walking trees, occasionally being nudged gently in the right direction, learning slowly how to be what it would eventually become. Let me tell you about the pterosaurs now, because even though they weren't dinosaurs, they lived alongside dinosaurs and are often thought of as part of that ancient world. Pterosaurs were flying reptiles, and some of them grew to absolutely tremendous sizes. The largest pterosaur we know of, Quetzalcoatlus, had a wingspan of about 33 to 36 feet, maybe even more. That's wider than many small airplanes. When it stood on the ground, it was as tall as a giraffe. Just imagine seeing such a creature flying overhead, its enormous wings beating slowly, casting a shadow as large as a bedroom across the ground below. But Quetzalcoatlus, despite its immense size, probably weighed only around 400 to 500 pounds. Its bones were hollow, filled with air sacs connected to its lungs, making it light enough to fly despite its enormous wingspan. When it landed, it probably walked on all fours, using its wings as front legs, moving with a sort of awkward loping gait across the ground, perhaps hunting small animals or scavenging from carcasses. Picture one of these magnificent creatures on a beach at sunset, the waves rolling in slowly, the creature standing still, its head moving back and forth as it watches the tide, waiting for something patient and strange and beautiful. Here's something about the end of the dinosaurs, the extinction event that happened 66 million years ago. We know now that a massive asteroid about 6 miles wide struck the Earth in what is now the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact was unimaginably violent. It released more energy than 1 billion nuclear bombs. It created a crater more than 100 miles wide. It sent shockwaves around the planet. It threw so much debris into the atmosphere that the sky darkened, blocking out the sun for months or even years. But here's what I want you to focus on, what's almost peaceful to think about in a strange way. Before that impact, dinosaurs had no idea their time was ending. That particular day probably started like any other day had started for 165 million years. Dinosaurs woke up, or maybe they never really slept in the way we think of sleep. They began their day's activities, eating, moving, interacting with each other. Somewhere a triceratops was eating ferns. Somewhere a duck-billed dinosaur was calling to its herd. Somewhere a T-Rex was resting in the shade, digesting its last meal. Life was continuing its ancient patterns, its rituals perfected over countless generations. They didn't know that day would be different. They didn't know what was coming. They were just living, just being, in the eternal present that all animals inhabit. And in a way, isn't that how it always is? We never really know what's coming. We can plan and worry and imagine, but ultimately all we ever really have is this moment right now and what we choose to do with it. So let yourself be present, right now in this moment, in the comfort of your bed, in the quiet of the night. Let everything else fall away. Let me tell you about trace fossils now, because these are some of the most evocative remnants of the dinosaur age. Trace fossils aren't bones or teeth, they're evidence of dinosaur behavior, frozen in stone. Footprints are the most common trace fossils, and we've found thousands of them all over the world. These trackways tell us so much about how dinosaurs moved, how fast they walked, whether they traveled alone or in groups, even sometimes how they interacted with each other. There's a famous trackway in Texas, for instance, that shows the footprints of a large theropod following the footprints of a sauropod, suggesting a predator stalking its prey. You can see where the sauropod's footprints show that it changed direction, perhaps sensing the danger. You can see where the theropod's footprints show it speeding up. It's like watching a chase scene that happened 110 million years ago. The drama preserved in stone. But there are other trace fossils too. Fossilized dinosaur poop called coprolites, which can tell us about dinosaur diets. Fossilized skin impressions showing us the texture and pattern of dinosaur skin. Even fossilized stomach contents showing us the last meal an animal ate before it died. Each of these is a tiny window into a specific moment in the life of a specific individual who lived unimaginably long ago. That sauropod walking across that ancient mudflat didn't know its footprints would last for millions of years. It was just walking, just going about its day, and yet here we are, so far in the future, able to see exactly where it stepped. There's something touching about that, the way the ordinary becomes extraordinary given enough time. Let's talk about Stegosaurus now, a smaller pachycephalosaur, a relative of the big Pachycephalosaurus we talked about earlier. Stegosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous period in what is now North America, and it was only about 6 to 7 feet long, maybe 3 feet tall at the hip, with a domed head like its larger cousin, though not quite as thick. Stegosaurus was probably an omnivore, eating a mix of plants, seeds, insects, and maybe small vertebrates, using its small, serrated teeth to process a varied diet. Picture a Stegosaurus moving through undergrowth in a forest, its head low, sniffing at the ground, occasionally pausing to nibble at a mushroom or snap up a beetle, completely absorbed in the small, immediate tasks of survival, unaware that millions of years later someone lying in bed would be thinking about it, imagining its life. Here's a fact about dinosaur metabolism that's shifted our understanding considerably in recent decades. For most of the 20th century, scientists assumed dinosaurs were cold-blooded, like modern reptiles, relying on external heat sources to regulate their body temperature. But more recent research suggests that many dinosaurs, particularly theropods and possibly sauropods, were actually warm-blooded or something close to it, generating their own body heat through metabolism, like modern birds and mammals. This has implications for how active they were. Warm-blooded animals can sustain activity for much longer periods than cold-blooded ones. They can live in a wider range of climates. They can be active at night or in cool weather. So the picture we have now of dinosaurs is of much more dynamic, active creatures than we used to imagine. Not slow and sluggish, but alert and energetic, more like the behavior of birds than lizards. But even active, warm-blooded animals need rest. They need to sleep, or at least to have periods of reduced activity. So imagine a T-Rex at night, settled down in some secluded spot, its head tucked in slightly, its breathing slow and steady, its massive body at rest, dreaming whatever dreams dinosaurs dreamed. Let yourself settle into rest the way that ancient creature did, giving your body permission to relax completely. Now let me tell you about Maiasaura again, because I mentioned it briefly before, but this dinosaur deserves more attention. Maiasaura, good mother lizard, gets its name from the evidence of parental care associated with its fossils. In Montana, paleontologists found a nesting site with fossilized nests, eggs, hatchlings, juveniles, and adults all together. The nests were spaced evenly, about the length of an adult Maiasaura apart, suggesting this was a colonial nesting ground. The nests contained eggshells that had been trampled and broken, and the hatchlings showed evidence of worn teeth, suggesting they stayed in the nest for some time after hatching, being fed by their parents. This was revolutionary evidence when it was discovered in the 1970s and 80s, because it showed that at least some dinosaurs had complex parental care, that they didn't just lay eggs and abandon them like turtles, but actually raised their young, protecting them and feeding them. Imagine the scene at one of these nesting colonies. Dozens of adult Maiasaura moving back and forth, bringing plants to their nests, where hatchlings too young to leave wait, peeping for food, the adults calling to each other, coordinating their efforts, watching for predators. The whole colony alive with activity and purpose, all centered on the care of the next generation. There's something deeply affirming about that. The way care for the young seems to be built into the very fabric of life, showing up again and again across different species, different time periods. Here's a peaceful thought about fossilization. Most fossils form in water. A creature dies, perhaps in a river or lake or shallow sea, and it sinks to the bottom. Sediment. Tiny particles of mud and sand slowly drifts down and covers it. Grain by grain, a patient burial that takes weeks or months. More sediment accumulates above, the weight gradually increasing. Over thousands of years, the sediment turns to stone, and the bones within, through chemical processes too slow and subtle to easily imagine, also turn to stone. Or rather, the original bone material is replaced molecule by molecule with minerals, until what remains is rock in the exact shape of bone. It's a transformation that takes immense time, immense pressure, immense patience. Nothing about it can be rushed. The stone is made slowly, the way all lasting things are made. Let yourself feel that patience now, that sense of slow transformation, of becoming what you need to be in your own time, without hurry. Let's talk about some of the smaller theropods, the group that includes T-Rex but also many much smaller dinosaurs. There was Velociraptor, for instance, made famous by movies but actually much smaller than its film portrayal. A real Velociraptor was about the size of a large turkey, maybe 3 feet tall and 6 feet long including its tail. It was probably covered in feathers, and it had a large sickle-shaped claw on each foot that it could use to slash at prey. Velociraptor hunted in the deserts and semi-arid environments of late Cretaceous Mongolia, chasing down small mammals and reptiles, possibly hunting in small packs, using coordination and intelligence to take down larger prey. There's a famous fossil, nicknamed the Fighting Dinosaurs, that shows a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked in combat, both preserved in the same position they were in when they died, probably buried suddenly by a collapsing sand dune. The velociraptor's killing claw is embedded in the protoceratops's throat, while the protoceratops's beak is clamped on the velociraptor's arm. They died together, in the middle of their struggle, and there they remained for 75 million years, until humans found them and recognized this frozen moment of ancient violence. But even that violence, that struggle, was just part of the natural flow of life. The velociraptor was hunting because it was hungry. The protoceratops was defending itself because it wanted to live. Neither was evil or cruel. They were just being what they were, following the instincts that had kept their species alive for millions of years. There's a kind of peace in accepting that. The natural order of things, the way every creature has its place and its purpose. Now let me tell you about Iguanodon, one of the first dinosaurs ever discovered, and one of the 3 dinosaurs that inspired the term dinosaur in the first place. Iguanodon was a large herbivore, about 30 feet long, with a distinctive thumb spike that was originally thought to be a horn on its nose when it was first discovered. For years, scientists had this wrong, reconstructing Iguanodon with a horn on its snout like a rhinoceros. Only later, when more complete skeletons were found, did they realize the spike belonged on the hand. That thumb spike was probably used for defense against predators, or for breaking into tough fruits and seeds, or for display and combat with rivals. Iguanodon could walk on all fours or on just its hind legs, making it quite versatile in how it moved through its environment. What I love about Iguanodon is how it shows the progress of paleontology, the way our understanding changes and improves as we find new evidence. We're always learning, always correcting our previous assumptions, getting closer and closer to the truth of how these animals really lived. That's a good lesson for life, isn't it? To hold our beliefs lightly, to be willing to change our minds when we learn new things, to approach everything with curiosity rather than certainty. Breathe gently and let that openness settle into you. Let me tell you about Baryonyx, another fish-eating dinosaur like Spinosaurus, though quite different in many ways. Baryonyx lived during the early Cretaceous period in what is now England, about 125 million years ago. It had a long, narrow snout, similar to a crocodile's, full of small, sharp teeth, perfect for gripping slippery fish. Its arms were long and powerful, ending in enormous curved claws, particularly on the thumb, which could be a foot long or more. These claws were probably used for hooking fish out of the water, like a bear fishing for salmon. Imagine Baryonyx standing at the edge of a river in ancient England, the water cool and clear, full of fish. It watches patiently, its head angled down toward the surface, perfectly still except for the slight movement of its eyes tracking the fish below. Then, with sudden speed, it strikes, its claw-tipped hand plunging into the water, emerging with a fish impaled on that massive thumb claw. It lifts the struggling fish to its mouth, holds it carefully in its jaws, and then settles down to eat, taking its time, savoring the meal. There's something almost meditative about fishing, isn't there? The patience it requires, the stillness, the moment of explosive action followed by calm satisfaction. Even dinosaurs understood this rhythm, this ancient dance between predator and prey. Here's something interesting about dinosaur growth. We can tell how old a dinosaur was when it died by looking at its bones under a microscope, examining the growth rings, similar to how you can age a tree by counting its rings. These growth lines show periods of fast growth and slow growth, possibly corresponding to seasons or years. By studying these lines, scientists have determined that most dinosaurs grew quite quickly in their youth, then slowed down as they approached adult size, and then grew very little in their final years. T-Rex, for instance, went through an incredible growth spurt in its teenage years, gaining as much as 1,000 pounds per year, transforming from a relatively slender juvenile into the massive apex predator of its adult form. This rapid growth required enormous amounts of food and energy, meaning teenage T-Rexes were probably eating constantly, hunting almost daily, just to fuel their growing bodies. Then, once they reached full size, their metabolism slowed, and they could go longer between meals, conserving energy, moving with the confident power of a mature predator at the height of its capabilities. Let yourself feel that sense of mature confidence, of having grown into yourself, of being exactly the size and shape and age you need to be. Now let's talk about Deinonychus, a dinosaur that changed everything when it was discovered. Before Deinonychus was described in 1969, most people thought of dinosaurs as slow, sluggish creatures, evolutionary dead ends. But Deinonychus was different. It was clearly built for speed and agility, with long, powerful legs, a stiff tail for balance, and those distinctive sickle claws on its feet. The scientist who described it, John Ostrom, argued that Deinonychus must have been warm-blooded and highly active, more like a bird than a lizard. This description sparked what's been called the dinosaur renaissance, a complete rethinking of how dinosaurs lived and behaved. Suddenly, dinosaurs were interesting again, dynamic, complex. This led to renewed interest in studying them, which led to new discoveries, which further refined our understanding, all because of this one relatively small dinosaur, about 11 feet long, that lived 115 million years ago in what is now Montana and Wyoming. Deinonychus probably hunted in packs, coordinating their attacks on larger prey, using their claws to slash and their teeth to tear. But when they weren't hunting, they probably rested together, groomed each other, engaged in play or practice hunting, all the social behaviors we see in modern pack predators. Picture a group of Deinonychus in the late afternoon, full from a successful hunt, resting in a patch of sun, their sides heaving gently, their eyes half closed, secure in each other's presence. Let yourself feel that security now, that sense of being able to rest completely because you're safe. Here's something that connects dinosaurs to the modern world in an unexpected way. Some dinosaurs had hollow bones, not just the theropods that would eventually give rise to birds, but many other dinosaurs as well. These hollow bones were filled with air sacs connected to the respiratory system, similar to what modern birds have. This system allowed them to breathe more efficiently, getting more oxygen into their blood with each breath, which supported higher levels of activity. But it also made their bones lighter, which was crucial for large dinosaurs. A solid-boned sauropod would have been impossibly heavy, too heavy to move effectively. By having hollow bones, these massive creatures could achieve their enormous sizes while still being able to walk and, in their youth, perhaps even run. Modern birds use this same system, which is part of what makes flight possible. So when you see a bird flying overhead, that efficient respiratory system that allows it to sustain the tremendous energy demands of flight is the same system, inherited from its dinosaur ancestors, that allowed a diplodocus to walk despite weighing 15 tons. It's all connected, you see. The past and the present, the extinct and the living, all part of one great continuing story. Let that connection comfort you. The sense that you're part of something vast and ancient and ongoing. Let me tell you about Psittacosaurus, a small herbivorous dinosaur that lived during the early Cretaceous period in what is now China, Mongolia, and Russia. Psittacosaurus was about 6 feet long, bipedal, with a beak like a parrot. Its name means parrot lizard, and it had small horns or spikes on its cheeks that gave it a distinctive look. But what's really special about Psittacosaurus is how well preserved some of its fossils are. One specimen in particular, found in China, preserved not just bones but also skin impressions, showing scales, and most remarkably, evidence of quill-like structures on its tail. These weren't true feathers, but they were similar, hollow tubes that probably had some sensory or display function. Another exceptional specimen preserved evidence of colour patterning, showing that Psittacosaurus had a dark back and a lighter belly, a pattern called counter-shading that's common in modern animals, providing camouflage by counteracting the effects of light and shadow, so we can look at this one dinosaur and know not just what its bones were like, but what its skin was like, what structures it had on its body, even what colours it was. We can picture it with remarkable accuracy, this small creature moving through forests 120 million years ago, its patterned scales catching dappled sunlight, its tail quills perhaps vibrating slightly as it moved, its parrot-like beak clipping off leaves and shoots. That's the power of exceptional preservation. The way it brings the past into such sharp focus that it almost doesn't feel like the past anymore. It feels immediate, present, real. Breathe gently and let yourself be present with that image, that little dinosaur going about its day, completely unaware that someday someone would reconstruct what it looked like in such detail. Here's something about the diversity of dinosaur diets. While we often focus on the big predators like T-Rex and the large herbivores like Triceratops, there were dinosaurs with much more specialized diets. There were insectivores that probably fed primarily on insects and other small invertebrates. There were possible egg-eaters that may have specialized in raiding nests. There were omnivores that ate a mix of plants and animals, adapting their diet to whatever was available. Oviraptor, for instance, whose name unfortunately means egg thief, was actually probably an omnivore that ate a varied diet including plants, shellfish, and possibly some meat. Its beak was powerful and toothless, good for crushing hard objects, and it probably used this to crack open shells or tough plant materials. The diversity of dinosaur diets reflects the diversity of ecological niches they filled. Every environment on Earth during the Mesozoic era, from the driest deserts to the wettest swamps, from the coldest highlands to the warmest lowlands, had its dinosaurs, each adapted to make a living in its particular place. That's how evolution works, you see. It finds ways to fill every available space, every opportunity, creating endless variety from simple principles of variation and selection. There's something reassuring about that. The way life finds a way, the way there's room for everyone if we look closely enough at the details. Let's talk about Allosaurus now, because before T-Rex, Allosaurus was the top predator of its time and place. Allosaurus lived during the late Jurassic period, about 155 to 150 million years ago, primarily in what is now the western United States. It was about 28 feet long and weighed around 2 tons, smaller than T-Rex but still a formidable predator. It had a large head with powerful jaws, short arms with 3-fingered hands bearing sharp claws, and a long, muscular tail for balance. What's interesting about Allosaurus is evidence suggesting it may have hunted in groups. At one site in Utah, the bones of at least 46 individual Allosaurus have been found, all from different ages, from juveniles to full adults. This suggests they may have been part of a pack, or at least tolerant of each other's presence, possibly working together to bring down large sauropods. Imagine a group of Allosaurus, 5 or 6 of them, moving through a late Jurassic landscape, following a herd of Diplodocus. They're patient, these hunters, waiting for the right opportunity. Maybe one of the Diplodocus is injured, or sick, or too young or too old to keep up with the herd. The Allosaurus notice this, communicate with each other through postures and low sounds we can only guess at, and coordinate their attack. They strike from different angles, using their numbers to overwhelm their much larger prey, their teeth and claws working together to bring the sauropod down. It's brutal, yes, but it's also strategic, coordinated, almost cooperative. These aren't mindless monsters. They're intelligent predators working together to survive. That kind of cooperation is one of life's great strategies, showing up in species after species, time after time, because it works. Because together we can accomplish what we couldn't alone. Let yourself feel supported now, held up by invisible structures of connection and care, the way those Allosaurus supported each other. Here's something peaceful to contemplate. During the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, the Earth's climate was generally much warmer than it is today. There were no polar ice caps. Even Antarctica and the Arctic regions were relatively warm, covered in forests. The overall temperature gradient from the equator to the poles was much less extreme than it is now, meaning more of the Earth's surface was comfortably warm. This warm climate contributed to the success of dinosaurs. They could inhabit every continent, including those that are now frozen wastelands. There were dinosaurs living in what is now Alaska, Australia, even Antarctica. During the austral summer in Cretaceous Antarctica, the sun never set for months at a time, and dinosaurs roamed through forests of evergreens and ferns, adapted to long periods of continuous daylight. Imagine that. Dinosaurs walking through forests under the midnight sun, feeding on plants that grew lush in the endless summer light, living in a world so different from ours that it's hard to even picture it clearly. But they thrived there. They made those strange conditions their home. They adapted, as life always adapts, finding ways to flourish in whatever environment it finds itself. There's a lesson there about adaptability, about making the best of whatever circumstances we're given, about thriving rather than just surviving. Breathe slowly and let that adaptability settle into your bones, that confidence that you too can thrive wherever you find yourself. Now let me tell you about Carnotaurus, a distinctive theropod from late Cretaceous South America. Carnotaurus was about 25 feet long, with a deep, short skull that was unusual for large theropods, which typically had longer snouts. But what really made Carnotaurus distinctive were the two thick horns above its eyes, giving it a bull-like appearance. Its name means meat-eating bull. These horns were probably used for display or for fighting with rivals, head-butting or pushing contests to establish dominance. Carnotaurus also had exceptionally small arms, even smaller in proportion to its body than T-Rex's famously tiny arms. They were so small that they probably had almost no function at all, just vestigial remnants of what its ancestors had possessed. Evolution sometimes works that way, reducing structures that are no longer useful, gradually shrinking them generation by generation until they're barely there at all. There's something almost poignant about that, these huge predators with their tiny useless arms, carrying around these remnants of their evolutionary past. It reminds us that nothing is permanent, that everything changes, that what was once useful may become obsolete, but life continues anyway, adapting, changing, moving forward. Let yourself move forward too, letting go of what no longer serves you, trusting that what you need will be there when you need it. Here's a fact about one of the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered. Dinosaur, which means terrible hand, was known for decades only from a pair of massive arms, each about 8 feet long, ending in claws nearly a foot long. These arms were found in Mongolia in 1965, and for years, paleontologists speculated about what kind of creature they belonged to. Some thought it must be an enormous predator. Others suggested it might be a giant sloth-like dinosaur. The mystery persisted for almost 50 years. Then, in 2014, 2 more specimens of Dinosaurus were described, including more complete skeletons, and the reality turned out to be stranger than anyone had guessed. Dinosaurus was an omnivore about 36 feet long, with a duck-like bill, a sail or hump on its back, and those enormous arms which it probably used to pull down branches or dig for plants. It looked like no other dinosaur, a unique combination of features that made it perfectly adapted to its particular lifestyle in late Cretaceous Mongolia. This is one of the great joys of paleontology. The way mysteries persist and then are suddenly solved. The way the truth, when it's finally revealed, is often stranger and more wonderful than our imaginations could have produced. There are still mysteries out there, still fossils waiting to be found, still questions waiting for answers. The story of dinosaurs isn't finished. We're still learning, still discovering, still putting together this vast puzzle of the past, and that's okay. Not everything needs to be known right now. Some mysteries can wait. Let yourself be comfortable with not knowing, with leaving some questions unanswered, with trusting that understanding will come in its own time. Let me tell you about hadrosaurs, those duck-billed dinosaurs I've mentioned a few times. Hadrosaurs were incredibly diverse and successful during the late Cretaceous period. They range from about 20 to 40 feet long and came in 2 main varieties, those with flat heads and those with elaborate crests on their heads. The flat-headed ones, like Edmontosaurus, probably relied on vocal calls produced in inflatable sacs in their throats for communication. The crested ones, like Parasaurolophus and Corythosaurus and Lambeosaurus, had those hollow crests I mentioned before, which amplified and modified their calls. What's remarkable about hadrosaurs is how successful they were. They were some of the most common dinosaurs in their ecosystems, forming huge herds that grazed on plants the way bison once grazed on the Great Plains. Their teeth were among the most sophisticated of any dinosaurs, arranged in dental batteries with hundreds of teeth packed together, constantly growing and replacing themselves, perfect for grinding tough plant material. Imagine a herd of hundreds of these dinosaurs moving slowly across a floodplain, their heads down as they feed. Occasionally one of them will raise its head and call out, that deep resonant sound carrying for miles, and others answering, the air filling with their voices a chorus of the ancient world. There's something communal and comforting about herd animals. The way they move together, support each other, communicate across distances. They remind us that we're not meant to be alone. That connection is built into the very structure of life. Let yourself feel connected now to all of life, past and present, part of one great herd moving through time. Here's something about the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, the one that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago. While the asteroid impact was the immediate cause, the Earth actually recovered relatively quickly on a geological timescale. Within a few thousand years, plants were growing again. Within a few 100,000 years, mammals were diversifying and filling the ecological niches left empty by the dinosaurs. Within a few million years, the world looked completely different, transformed. But here's what's remarkable. Life itself was never really in danger. Yes, 3/4 of all species went extinct, including all the non-avian dinosaurs. But life as a phenomenon, the presence of living things on Earth, was never threatened. Bacteria survived, insects survived, many plants survived, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish all had survivors that made it through and then thrived in the aftermath. Life is resilient. Life is persistent. Life finds a way forward, even through the worst catastrophes. That's comforting, isn't it? The knowledge that even when things seem darkest, even when everything appears to be ending, life continues, adapts, recovers, eventually flourishes again. You have that same resilience in you, whatever you're going through, whatever difficulties you're facing. You have within you the same fundamental drive to continue, to adapt, to survive and eventually thrive. Trust that resilience now. Let it support you as you drift towards sleep. Let me tell you about Giganotosaurus, another massive theropod that lived in South America during the late Cretaceous period, about 98 to 97 million years ago. Giganotosaurus was roughly the same size as T-Rex, maybe slightly larger, about 40 feet long and weighing around 8 tons. It had a long, narrow skull with blade-like teeth, perfect for slicing through flesh. Unlike T-Rex's bone-crushing bite, Giganotosaurus probably relied on bleeding out its prey, inflicting deep cuts and then following this wounded animal until it weakened from blood loss. There's evidence that Giganotosaurus may have hunted in packs, working together to bring down giant sauropods like Argentinosaurus, which lived in the same time and place. Imagine the scene. 3 or 4 Giganotosaurus coordinating their attack on a creature, 5 or 6 times their own weight, darting in to slash at its legs and flanks, then backing off, letting the sauropod tire itself out trying to defend against multiple attackers from different directions. But even these massive predators spent most of their time resting, conserving energy between hunts, lying in the shade during the heat of the day, their breathing slow and regular, their bodies relaxed, gathering strength for the next hunt, the next challenge. Even the fiercest predators knew the value of rest, of taking time to recover, of not pushing themselves constantly. Let yourself rest now, deeply and fully, the way those ancient predators did, trusting that when you wake, you'll be ready for whatever comes next. Here's something about Ankylosaurus again, because I find this dinosaur particularly calming to think about. Ankylosaurus was so heavily armoured that it probably had very few predators, even though it lived at the same time as T-Rex, the thick plates covering its back and sides would have made it nearly invulnerable to biting attacks. Even its eyelids were armoured, with small bony plates that could close to protect its eyes. The only vulnerable part of an Ankylosaurus was its belly, and flipping over a 2-ton dinosaur that was built low to the ground would have been essentially impossible for any predator. So Ankylosaurus could afford to be calm, to move slowly through its environment, to stop and eat whenever it wanted, knowing that it was safe, that its armor protected it, that it had nothing to fear. There's something to be learned from that. The peace that comes from feeling protected, from knowing you're safe, from being able to let your guard down. Let yourself feel that protection now. You're safe here, in this moment, in your bed, with nothing to fear. Let your armor, your defenses soften and relax. Let me tell you about the discovery of soft tissue in some dinosaur fossils. In 2005, a paleontologist named Mary Schweitzer reported finding what appeared to be soft tissue, including blood vessels and possibly even cells, preserved inside a T-Rex leg bone. This was considered almost impossible. Soft tissue shouldn't be able to survive for millions of years, but the evidence was there, and further studies confirmed it. Since then, soft tissue has been found in other dinosaur fossils as well, including proteins like collagen. This has opened up new avenues of research, allowing scientists to study the biochemistry of dinosaurs, to understand their physiology at a molecular level, to potentially even extract genetic information, though full DNA recovery is probably impossible. What this shows us is that the past is not as lost as we thought. Fragments remain, tiny pieces of information preserved against all odds, waiting to teach us things we never imagined we could learn. The past leaves traces, you see. Nothing is ever completely gone. Everything we've experienced, everything we've been, leaves some mark, some impression, some subtle change in the world around us. You are the sum of everything you've experienced, every moment, every choice, every connection. All of it has made you who you are, and none of it is lost, even if it's not always visible. Let that continuity comfort you, the sense that everything matters, everything contributes, everything is preserved in some way. Now let me tell you about Brachiosaurus, that iconic long-necked dinosaur that stands as a symbol of the age of giants. Brachiosaurus lived during the late Jurassic period, about 154 to 150 million years ago, primarily in what is now North America and Africa. It was enormous, about 85 feet long, and weighing 40 to 50 tons, with front legs that were longer than its hind legs, giving it a giraffe-like posture, its shoulders higher than its hips, its long neck angling upward to reach the very tops of trees. Brachiosaurus probably spent most of its waking hours eating, consuming hundreds of pounds of vegetation every day to fuel its massive body. It had chisel-like teeth perfect for stripping foliage from branches, and it swallowed this food without chewing, letting its massive stomach, aided by gastroliths, do the work of breaking down the plant material. Picture a Brachiosaurus at sunset, standing among giant conifers in a late Jurassic forest, its head extending up into the canopy where few other animals could reach, peacefully eating as the light fades, casting long shadows across the forest floor, its movements slow and deliberate, a living monument to the possibilities of life. There's something cathedral-like about the very large, isn't there? Something that inspires awe and quiets the mind. In the presence of something so much larger than ourselves, our usual worries seem to shrink, become less overwhelming. Let yourself feel small in a good way now, held by something larger than yourself, whether that's the vastness of time, or nature, or the universe itself. Here's something about colour in dinosaurs. For a long time we had no idea what colours dinosaurs were. We could guess based on modern animals, assuming they might have had camouflage or display colours, but we couldn't know. Then, starting in the early 2000s, scientists discovered that some exceptionally well-preserved feather fossils still retained microscopic structures called melanosomes, which determine colour in modern bird feathers. By comparing the size, shape, and arrangement of these ancient melanosomes to those in modern birds, scientists could determine the actual colours of some dinosaur feathers. We now know that Microraptor had black, iridescent feathers, shimmering like a raven. We know that Nachiornis had red and grey and white feathers, patterned in ways similar to some modern birds. We know that Sinosauropteryx had a striped tail, orange and white bands running down its length. The ancient world was colourful, we now know. It wasn't all browns and greys. There were reds and oranges, blues and greens, blacks that shimmered with rainbow highlights. The forests of the Mesozoic were bright with colour, just as forests are today. Imagine those colours now, bright and vibrant in your mind's eye. A Jurassic forest at dawn, mist rising, sunlight filtering through, and everywhere colour, life, movement, sound. The world alive and beautiful in ways that echo down through millions of years to reach us today. Let those colours fill your mind, bright but not harsh, vivid but soothing, like stained glass in a quiet church. Let's talk about Protoceratops, a small ceratopsian that was an ancestor of the great horned dinosaurs like Triceratops. Protoceratops lived during the late Cretaceous period in what is now Mongolia, and it was only about 6 feet long, with a small frill and no horns. Despite its small size, Protoceratops was incredibly common in its environment, and we've found thousands of fossils, including complete growth series from hatchlings to adults, giving us an unprecedented look at how these dinosaurs developed. Protoceratops probably lived in small groups, feeding on tough desert plants, using its beak to crop vegetation close to the ground. It laid its eggs in nests dug into sand, arranging them carefully in circular or spiral patterns. When a dust storm threatened, adults probably huddled together, protecting the young ones in the center, their frills providing some shelter, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. There's something endearing about Protoceratops, something approachable about its small size and its commonness. Not every dinosaur was a giant or a fierce predator. Most were probably relatively ordinary, going about their lives without drama, just trying to survive, to eat, to reproduce, to get through each day. Most of life is like that, isn't it? Not dramatic or special, just the ordinary work of living. And there's beauty in that ordinariness, value in the simple continuation of existence. Let yourself appreciate the ordinary now, the simple fact of being alive, of breathing, of resting, of having made it through another day. Here's a final thought about dinosaurs before we part. They lived for 165 million years, these magnificent creatures, and then they were gone, all except the birds. Their time ended, but the earth continued, life continued. New forms arose, filled the empty spaces, created new wonders. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. Endings are inevitable. But endings are also beginnings. The extinction of the dinosaurs allowed mammals to flourish, which eventually led to us, to humans, to this moment right now, where you're lying in bed listening to stories about creatures that died out 66 million years ago. There's a pattern there, a cycle, a rhythm. Things rise and fall, come and go, appear and disappear. But the underlying current of life that continues, flowing forward, always changing, never stopping. You're part of that current. You're a brief, bright moment in the vast flow of life on Earth, connected to everything that came before and everything that will come after. Let yourself flow now, gently, peacefully, into sleep, into dreams, into rest. The dinosaurs are sleeping now, deep in stone, patient and still. Sleep well, my friend. Until we meet again in another journey through time, good night.